Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove, and today we are going to look at the subject of neobiological civilization. With me is Kevin Kelly, editor-at-large of Wired magazine and author of New Rules for a New Economy and Out of Control. Welcome, Kevin.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to be with you. You have focused on a topic which is so pervasive that everybody ought to recognize it, but very few people have really pinpointed it, Kevin, the way you have, and that is the convergence of biology and technology into a kind of a new hybrid which surrounds us in many, many different ways and is helping to shed light on our understanding both of the nature of technology and the nature of life itself.
You know, the idea that our machines are somewhat like organisms, and the idea that organisms could be seen as machines is actually a very old idea. I think what's changed right now is that we are making machines so complicated, so complex, that really the only way we can understand how to make them and use them is to reinvigorate, to resurrect and deepen this metaphor of this convergence of the made and the born.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's been quite an emphasis in recent years for scientists and engineers to study the biological world, to learn how to make machines more by imitating nature. And you yourself have observed nature very closely. You open your book Out of Control by describing your experience as a beekeeper, and the metaphor of the beehive seems very crucial to your understanding of the essence of biological functioning.
You know, engineers for a very long time have imitated, as you suggested, nature, and so we have things like Velcro being based on the barbs of a burr, and barbed wire being the thorns of an Osage bush, and so torpedoes being like sharks. So that's an old idea, but I think what we're talking about now, which is sort of the next level, is actually importing some of the very principles that govern these behaviors, not just imitating them, but actually importing them. And as an example would be the ways in which, for instance, the internet data is routed on the internet. Which has something to do with a beehive. And that is, what happens there is that rather than sending a particular bit of information in a direct route, as short as possible from A to B, you break it up into a lot of different little tiny packets, and you let the whole mass of them go in indirect ways and arrive at the destination on their own accord, out of control. And that's using some of the principles of biology in a mechanical system, and that is what is new.
Well, the beehive that you describe, I want to come back to that if I may. As I understand your thinking on this matter, you point out that each individual bee is a relatively simple organism, not particularly evolved or intelligent, but the hive as a whole has an intelligence, and you could call it an emergent property, one that transcends the intelligence of any individual bee, so that it's as if the hive is actually the organism rather than the bee.
Right, and in biology this was called the idea of a superorganism. Wharton Wheeler and others actually proposed that we look at beehives this way. And what's interesting about that view is that if you took a bee and you had 100 years to dissect the bee and observe the bee, take it apart, watch it, you would never see anything about a hive in the bee itself. It's only when you have enough of these bees together and you have all of them interacting that you see this phenomena of hive. And the hive has a very different set of personalities than the bee itself. It has a longer memory, it has much more deeper number of kind of behaviors, and none of this is contained in the bee itself. And so where does it come from? This is the problem that the science of complexity has been trying to grapple with, is we take some very simple rules and we can observe them and they're finite and we can record them. But you put them all together and you have them interacting, and suddenly you get behaviors that are nowhere found in the individual parts. And this behavior can be very, very powerful. And the kinds of things that we see from that are beehives and internets, and more, actually, I'm suggesting, is we're seeing some very large systems that we're making that actually are able to harness this power. You take lots of little dumb, small things, you connect them together, you get something very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a friend who is writing another book, and it has to do with the convergence of all of these new technologies that we're experiencing now: nanotechnology, virtual reality, space exploration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And his concern is that these things are going out of control, that they're interfacing with each other and creating new hybrids in ways that are totally unpredictable. And he's kind of an alarmist about this. We've got to be very, very careful. We've got to try and understand what's happening. You, if I understand your writing correctly, you're much more, you have a sense of faith in the nature of things, that if you allow technology to control itself, which in effect we seem to have no choice, that it will establish its own equilibrium, that it's constrained by the same ecological principles ultimately that control all of nature.
My take on technology is maybe contains both sides, because I think we should have some concerns about technology as it becomes very complex and beyond our understanding. But there are several things that I think we should bring to it and not become alarmed. And that is that if we look at our own response to nature, it's very interesting. We have two responses to nature. Most days we look at nature as beautiful. We have awe and awe at the harmony of how everything fits together. We realize that our own survival as a species depends upon sort of obeying the laws of nature and not polluting things. And so there's a reverence towards nature. At the same time, the other part of our brain realizes that we have to keep nature back. We have to harness, domesticate it, train it, hack it back, keep it out, immunize ourselves against it. So there's a conquering aspect that happens at the same time, almost in the same moment that we have this sort of adoration and bowing down to it. The same thing is happening with technology. Technology right now is becoming so complicated that we have to have two different mindsets about it. One, we have to sort of control it, leverage it, keep it in its place, maintain it, in some ways direct it. Yeah. The other thing we have to do is let it be. Step back and let it do what it has to do. And that is actually the part that's sort of scary, but that's a necessary part in order to get the best virtues of technology. My suggestion is that we think of it as children. You have to train children, and you have to direct them, but at the same time you have to step back and let them do what they're going to do. And part of the problem is trying to decide what is it that they want to do, and that's the question that I'm asking myself, which is, what is it that technology wants?
My own sense of it, and you touch upon this in your writings, is that technology that we create is actually part of the natural world. Since we're part of nature and we created, our technology is also part of nature, and that in a sense it's part of the evolutionary process. When we put up satellites and telephone systems, it's like an extension of our own nervous system, and we're creating, it would almost seem to me, a kind of a global organism of this planet.
Yeah. There is a sense in which McLuhan was the first to mention this. All the things that we make, there are manufactured worlds, or basically extensions of ourselves. I define technology very, very broadly as not hardware. It's anything that our minds make. So double entry bookkeeping is technology as far as I'm concerned. Writing, lots of institutional creations of the university and library are also technology as much as a PC chip is. But the other interesting aspect of what you just said is that while we see this technology becoming more biological life, there's also a similar reversal in looking at biology as if it was machines, and in particular in bringing a computational metaphor to biology. If understanding that biology is in many ways can be reduced to a type of computational notation and understanding. Okay, and that's a very, very big step that's happening. So both those things are happening at once.
Well, now this, I have to say, is where I admire your writing in this area, and at the same time I feel it goes against the grain of some of my own philosophical and spiritual background, and I have a hard time thinking of us the way Marvin Minsky, who you write favorably about and who I've interviewed. He describes us, well, we're really just computers made out of meat. And I say to myself, where's the soul?
Right. I think this is the real question of this next century, and that is that is thinking, is consciousness, is life itself anything more than just a mechanical, reductionist kind of process?
Yeah.
And the answer is, so far, is that again and again we've been surprised about how much we can sort of do with this. Now, we haven't gone as far as to actually create life. We haven't gone as far as to create consciousness. But we've created some of the other things. And one of the things that we have created that was very surprising was we actually have been able to make evolution happen in artificial systems. Real evolution. Okay? And at first, the biologists really thought that couldn't be done. They thought it was that evolution was really very much a life phenomenon.
And when you say real evolution, you mean simulated real evolution?
Well, no. In fact, this is a semantic question. Is it really evolution or just simulated real evolution? And one can only say, well, if you see evolution do all the things that it does, and this is doing it, then why isn't that real evolution? Unless you're defining evolution as something that can only happen in life. Now, again, what's really interesting about this is that it liberates. The questions that are being dug up by this technology are the same questions you've been asking all your other guests and philosophers and theologians. But here we have some technologists trying to answer this question, and they're doing it by making an experiment and seeing what they can make.
I think that's exciting. I think that it's totally appropriate that we look to the engineers for answers. One of my mentors was Arthur Young, the fellow who invented the helicopter, and he started to study philosophy, and he decided that philosophers were a dime a dozen, and philosophy had failed to really predict the impact of science and technology in our life, and that if you wanted to earn your stripes, so to speak, earn the right to do a philosophy, you had to first master the physical world by taking on engineering projects. So I'm in favor of that, but let's go back to the question of simulating life inside of a computer. It raises the fundamental issue about what is consciousness. And is consciousness, as you propose, just in a conglomeration of many, many little subunits, and when they come together, something new emerges, or is it more fundamental than that?
I actually don't know the answer to the question about consciousness. In fact, I steered away from that in my book because it is so much more difficult. I decided to focus on the other one, the other biggie, which is life. Can we make life happen in something other than living things? And the evidence so far is that we can probably do a lot more than we thought we could. Now, we can't go all the way, but we've gone farther than we thought. And that has suggested that we can go even yet further.
Well, and you suggest that, in truth, a lot of the machines around us are very lifelike already, even automobiles.
Well, automobiles is easy to see, but we see some other software-like things, the internet. In fact, some of these programs where they're using evolution and very basic learning, we're seeing them in like Disney films and others. For instance, if you watch Mulan or Lion King, you'll see some scenes in there where there's great big herds of animals coming through. And none of those animals were drawn by anybody. They were generated by an algorithm, and they were moving. And they're moving in a very sophisticated way, the same way the birds flock, which they have some basic rules. And so the overall effect of it is very lifelike. And yet there is no life as we know it in there. So what's happening? Well, what we're seeing is that we had a definition of life. And then the artificial life guys accomplished some of those, most of them. And so everyone said, well, obviously life must be more than that. So they keep adding to the definition. And then when those are accomplished, well, they say, well, obviously, we need to add more. So we have this moving target of what we consider life is.
And people now can buy pets inside of
The Tamagotchis and others are very much like this. The Furbies and others. They're working on right now. In 1999, in the fall of 1999, there's going to be a doll that will have emotions and will respond to emotions. And this is something that one would have not thought even possible, but turns out that emotions are actually something that are easier to make than consciousness.
Well, there is a sense that many of our emotions are mechanical. We talk about knee-jerk reactions.
Right.
For example. So what you're saying is that the distinction between animate and inanimate, between conscious and not consciousness, is kind of fuzzy.
It's very fuzzy, and I actually believe that there's a soul. I actually believe that there is something more than just our mechanical body.
Yeah.
But I think that that our definitions are going to change over time. Yeah. I was very, very interested in the match between Deep Blue, the computer, and Kasparov, the chess master.
Oh yes, the computer that beat the chess master.
The computer that beat the chess master. And what was interesting about that is that when that happened a number of years ago, what happened was Kasparov felt at that very moment that the computer was alive. Okay? I mean, he said that. He actually demanded to see the transcripts because he actually really, really believed that there was an intelligence at that point. And so that's all has been our test of what an artificial intelligence was. It was you convinced somebody who was an expert that this was alive. Now, what's interesting to me was that for many, many years, chess was given as one of those markers that humans did. In other words, it was one of the definitions of being a human was that, well, we play chess.
Right.
Okay, so now something.
10 years ago, I interviewed Hubert Dreyfus, the philosopher, who said, "No, it'll never happen. You'll never have a computer beat a chess master."
Now we cross that one off. So obviously we have to change our definition of human, and I think this is what we're going to be headed into in the next century. Is we're going to be really grappling with this issue of what is a human, and what are humans, because little bit by little bit we're going to be using machines to do some of the things that we used to do. And I think we're not going to be make an artificial human, but I think we're going to change our definition of what humans are all about.
And we're likely to change who we are.
Yes.
At the same time, we seem to be, I would assert, taking control of our own evolution at this point as we develop these extensions of ourselves, and ultimately will probably be through genetic engineering and through more sophisticated computer implants. We now have pacemakers. We'll do more of that. We'll actually engineer hybrids.
Yes. I'm often accused at being editor at Wired of not being worried about technology, but I am worried about technology, and it's called genetic engineering. It's called of the human germline, which used to be called eugenics. And the new term I've just learned is called volitional evolution, where we actually direct our own evolution. Now, I think that's something worth worrying about myself.
Well, I not long ago interviewed Barbara Marx Hubbard, a spiritual teacher who talks about conscious evolution, and very, very similar, but with a different nuance to it. It seems to me, though, when you worry, now I want to get back to your other point about we can be grateful that we're out of control. And I know you've described yourself as a devout Christian, but you also, in your book, cite the great Taoist philosophers who talk about the way to have perfect control is to let go of needing to be in control of anything, and that you think it's wise for us not to try and control.
Well, here's my Christian interpretation of the Taoists, if you may. I believe that there's a God, that there's a divine creator. And the creator made some beings in a like mold of the creator. As best a creator could take something that was unlimited and make it limited. One of the essential ingredients of us as created beings is that we are creators too. Okay? And the ultimate creation is to make something that is creative itself, that has the ability to surprise you. So in order to do that, you have to make something that can surprise you. And that's what this robots and all these people involved with artificial intelligence are trying to do. They're trying to make something that will surprise them, and you have to let go in order to let them do that.
And you write very eloquently about all of the work that's going on in simulated cities and simulated battlefields and role-playing games where truly we are creating in cyberspace and virtual reality universes.
I call them God games because in fact what we're doing is we're playing God, and in the process we're actually understanding that there's different levels of godhood.
Yeah.
There's a kind of God where you make a game and then you can kind of interfere with the game at any point that you want to. There's another way of being a God where you set the rules and you let it go and you never interfere again. There's another kind of God where you change the rules of the game as you go along, so your only interference is sort of in an indirect way. There's another kind of a God where you actually put on a suit and get down into the world that you create in an incarnation. And so what I'm seeing is that, again, these technologists are actually doing more, I think, in theology and philosophy than the people who are just mostly working with books.
Yeah. You write that there's a danger that we may become addicted to these God games.
I think it's the ultimate addiction. And I think the Bible and others warn us about this, is that there's, really becoming confused about our abilities as gods, and then to confuse ourselves about thinking that we actually have powers that we don't have. So I look at Tamagotchis and these other things that we've seen in the late 1990s where there was these pets that people had to keep going. Electronic pets that you had to tend and nurse and nurture.
They will die if you don't pay attention to them.
That's right, and they will. And we can see that even for kids, they become very, very addictive. And so I suspect that this will be something that the internet will make look pale by comparison.
Well, one of the things that you wrote, in fact, and it struck me, Kevin, is you thought the ultimate addiction, the root of all of our cravings, was the addiction to be God, to control. I've done many interviews with spiritual teachers, and they give it a slightly different twist. They might say that the ultimate desire is union with the absolute, union with the divine, not necessarily to be God the creator like Zeus or Yahweh or Indra, but God in the more absolute Taoist sense.
I think the two can fit together. I think that you can have this longing, this tremendously driving urge to be at one with the universe and God, and at the same time to be addicted to the power that one has as a God, with a small g, by the way.
Well, there's a funny paradox where through our technology we do acquire godlike powers, but it's only, I would say, it's only through mastery of ourselves that we truly do. Otherwise, we get lost in the technology, and maybe we create things that are out of balance.
Yeah, the question I'm asking is what does technology want to do as a system? I have no illusions that we would be totally wrong and actually stupid as a species to let technology do whatever it wants to do. But we have to sort of find out what it wants first, and then we can kind of react against it and keep it in line. So I think the same thing in a personal sense. I think people have to bring values. I don't think technology gives us values. I think we have to bring values to the technology. We have to know what it is that we want. We have to know who we are. Technology can help us answer some of those questions, but I think we have to bring those things forward. And I think spiritual practices, I think being well-rounded, I think being very centered are all really very important, and more so in the world of technology.
My mentor, who I cited earlier, Arthur Young, used to say there wasn't a machine built that didn't have a purpose.
Well, yes.
Well, Kevin, we're out of time now. I've been a delightful and very stimulating interview. Thanks for being with me.
Again, it's been my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for being with us, and check your program guide for part 2 of our two-part program on neobiological civilization with Kevin Kelly.